continue in the Gospel according to Mark. We pick up in chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. Listen to the word of the Lord. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. When he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him any more, even with a chain. For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces. And no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him. And he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now there on the hillside a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, and let us enter into them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea, and were drowned. The swineherds ran off and told it in the city and in the country, and the people came to see what was that had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demonic sitting there, clothed in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion. They were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demonic and to the swine reported it, and then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by the demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim in Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Oh God, we ask that you open our hearts to your message this day. God, may we not stumble in the semantics of a lot of these issues, but let us find the truth in your law. So may these words truly be yours and not mine. In Jesus' name. Amen. So, how many here actually watched the TV show Friends?
Yeah.
Watch nothing.
Friends.
The beginning of Friends, every episode is called The One With, or one, and then whatever the next line is. There's a show that lasted 10 years in the 90s, and this is basically a show that got Jennifer Aniston, Courtney Cox, these people on your screen, their first start, and there was this huge A guest list that would happen. I mean, stars of these recurring characters, and people you loved and you fell in love with, and it was just a part of everyday Thursday nights. Well, the most iconic of these characters, come to find out, is one that never even was scripted in the show, doesn't have a credit at the end until 17 years after his last appearance happened. And he's considered the ugly naked guy. Now think about that. If you're a Friends watcher, you know in the first 5 seasons, he shows up, they talk about him because he lives across the way from Monica's apartment. And they look out and they're like, ooh, ugly naked guy, ooh, you know. And he just likes to do tasks and things in his home, naked obviously. Well, about the 5th season, they slid him out because Ross ends up buying his apartment. And that, Warner Brothers said that led to better dialogue and the joke was over. But he does show up in 2 episodes, but you only see his back. You do not see who he is. And so this has been a mystery that a man named Todd Van Leeuwen of the Huffington Post went on to solve. And he found out, he tracked down who the ugly naked guy was on the show. His name was John Hagen, and all those years later, he explained that his identity was to remain hidden. He said this is how Warner Brothers had it, and Warner Brothers even said that we didn't really want somebody associated with a character that, apprehensive just to even allow somebody, this is just not the kindest name that you would give somebody in this character. And so, and every time I would teach on the passage that we're going to dig into today, the junior high boys in the room always didn't catch much, but they caught the fact that he was naked. And I remember specifically that one of the kids like, "Ooh, ugly naked guy," you know, and those kids that were watching Friends, they get it. And so, much like the man in the story, we know only a few things about the ugly naked guy on Friends. We know where he lives, and we know that he's naked. The story today, we don't know much about that guy. We don't know his name. But we know where he lives, and the fact that he is filled with demons. Now, I don't want us to trip into this understanding of what demon possession is. This is different in those days than it is these days. It could even be mental illness. There could be some obsession. It could be an addiction. There could be so much more underlying that I don't want us to miss because we're hanging on to this exorcism or this paranormal situation that's happening in the story. But the one thing we do know about him is where he's from. And I think it's important for us to realize that even before we get there, you back up to chapter 4. I want to say that this story is in all three synoptic gospels. Not only is it in all the three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it also stays in the same order because we have this explained. He goes from Capernaum, calming the sea, arrival at the beach, and then he will go back. It's the same order in all three Gospels. And so, in other words, they're supposed to be tied together for some reason or not. Now, last week we talked about the parable of the soil, which is also mentioned in the other Gospels, about the same place. But the thing that we did skip, I want us to back up and just look at briefly. Jesus will come out and he will calm the sea. That here he's asleep, with a little cushion in this little bitty boat, and the storm comes up and it's raging, and then they wake him up and say, Jesus, do you want us to die? And they wake him up and he calms the sea, and he says, you have no faith, what is wrong with you? And then they're so in awe, they said, who was this? Even the wind and the sea obey him. Which is this common theme that we see in Mark, where it is this question, who is Jesus? Now, even if the disciples knew in their heads that here's the Messiah, they may not have had it in their heart yet. And that they're grabbing all this stuff and processing all these experiences, and yet they're still questioning. And know that Mark does make them look a little bit more boneheaded than the rest of the other Gospels do. And so here is this ugly naked guy that comes immediately out when Jesus' boat lands. But I wanted to show you where it lands. The very first verse says, they came to the other side of the sea. Now, we could say in our mind, it's on the other side of the tracks. It's on the side of town that nobody should be going to, right? Much less the Messiah. But, and you can look in footnotes, and there are 3 different places that can be mentioned, and there has been some geographical changes with the Sea of Galilee because of earthquakes throughout the centuries. And so there's always questioned, where did this actually happen? Because all 3 Gospels have it a little different. All 3 of those places are actual places. But the one thing they all have in common, they're on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. The other side of the Sea of Galilee is a non-Jewish territory. It's a Gentile territory. This is the place in which no Jew in their right mind should ever be. But here they are, and they show up, and as soon as, and you gotta love Mark and his fast-paced action that's happening. Immediately is what it says. Immediately, he comes toward. Now, I can imagine what the disciples are thinking. I just can't even imagine. They're like, why are we on the other side here? This is somewhere we never go. And if you say you're the Messiah, then you're here for us, the Jews. And you're not only going to an unclean place that you could become unclean and have to go through all these rituals to get back into community. You're going to this place, and here's an unclean spirit. Here comes a very unclean person in this world, coming out of the tombs, which is most likely not a Jewish cemetery. And they're thinking, Jesus has no business being here. Why did he go here? And I don't know. But I do know what happened when he went there. That here's a very detailed story of what happens, even more detailed than Mark is usually given. A very detailed story of the difference that Jesus will make when he crosses the boundaries into another part of the world. And he's crossing political lines, he's crossing religious lines, he's crossing theological lines, even so, and he's crossing into a place that he should have no business. If he's the Messiah that he says he is, he's not here for them. I believe Jesus is still wrestling with who's the Messiah. We even see when Jesus is confronted by the Syrophoenician woman, and she says to him, even the dogs deserve the crumbs from the master's table. When he's saying, I'm only here for my people. And then she says that, and he goes, oh. But this is pivotal in the Gospel of Mark, because this is a pivotal moment in which Jesus is opening his understanding of who he's to be the Messiah for. That obviously it's not just the Jews. It's for the world. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. Here as he crosses by, a place he's not supposed to be. It shows us that God's love doesn't leave anybody out. That God's love is infiltrated in part of who Jesus is, that his own identity as Messiah is wide open now. That no one should ever be excluded. No one should not be valued for their sacred worth. And Jesus is demonstrating that. For someone that is beyond just unclean. Here's a man that's out of his mind. Here's a man that's lived in the graves, tormenting himself, torturing himself, and scaring the bejesus out of everybody around. And I think often about how we do church. We had a new person show up at the park this morning. And he came in a little late, and so that church is great about it. You guys are great about it too. Just swarm him afterwards, talk to him. And he says to me, as everybody else kind of left and I was still talking to him, he said he went to another church here in town. I won't say which one it was. And the friend invited him, he went, and that person spoke to him, and the pastor did speak to him, but nobody else spoke to him. He said there were maybe 20 or 30 people in that church. And I think that we don't have a monopoly on it. We're not the best at it, but we are pretty dang good. When new people come, we don't look at the outward. We begin to see that everybody has a place at the table here. I'm fortunate to be a part of a denomination that really believes that. That's moving in ways to be more inclusive than ever. So if you've ever been made to feel like you are unworthy or made to feel like that you did not belong, I am so sorry. That's not what Jesus is demonstrating here. Jesus has come for all of us, especially the worshipers. And so when Jesus steps out of the boat, immediately this man comes running. And catch this. This is a man that lives among the tombs. He's been restrained, but he is sentenced to be like an animal, or even beyond an animal. Here's a man that symbolizes to us that he's living in the tombs, saying that he might as well be dead. That nothing can restrain him. Think of this image. All night long, he's crying, he's screaming, the top of his lungs, howling and bruising himself. We get hung in understanding and digging into what it means to be possessed. One of the professors says from Luther Seminary, the commentaries that I read, he says that the demons Jesus confronts have three things in common. They cause self-destructive behavior in the victim. The victim feels trapped in the condition, and they separate the victim from normal living in the family circle. Understanding what demon possession is in that day may help us understand not just a mental illness, but these could be people that are trapped in a place that's not healthy, among toxic people around them. among abusive situations, or a place they feel like they just can't get out of, and there's nothing they can do. This is the story of addiction. This is the story of coming out of that addiction. But this is also a place not only they feel trapped, they feel unloved, they feel forgotten, they feel, I might as well be dead. And they're distracted. That the inner turmoil that we see in the outwardness of him. We don't know his circumstances. We don't know why he's there. We don't know anything about his past. Here's a man that's desperate in search of inner peace. Here's a man that is still fighting, obviously still alive. One of the commentaries, Ogilvy says, his pangs of hunger drove him until he became the unacceptable sociopath that he was, unfit for self or anyone else. But we don't even know that. We know where he is, that he ends up being at the right place at the right time because Jesus shows up for him. That his soul is divided. He's been tugged in thousands of different directions. He's at war with himself. He is filled with unknown spirits that are not just unclean, but destructive. But notice this. Remember the disciples' question? Who then is this? There is no doubt to this man who Jesus really is. The disciples can't figure it out. They're with him all the time. But yet when the demon shows up, the man demonic shows up, that is the first thing that he begins to yell out. He runs to him and he bows down before him in an act of worship. And he shouts at the top of his lungs, and he says, "What will you do with me? Jesus, Son of Most High God," which is a Gentile title of the Jewish God. He knows who he is. He defines who he is. And yet, the religious leaders on the other side of the sea and those that are with him every day can't seem to grasp. This is huge. It speaks loudly to us. And how we begin to understand that we miss it more than we want to admit. The presence of God is real and at work in our own lives and in lives around us. We want to chalk it off to something else. Sometimes we have to admit that God is working. He's working in science. He's working in the medical scene. But yet God is still behind it. It's definitely not by anything that we do. It's by everything that he is. It's the Prince of Peace. And then Jesus yells, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." He's already at work in that sentence. Before, he's saying he has power over it, but then he asks that question, "What is your name?" Which in the ancient Near Eastern tradition, naming an entity gained power over it. That's why we say often in addiction and other things that we have to name what the problems are before we can tackle it. And he says, "Legion." Did deep dives in this whole legion thing because there's lots of different thoughts on how many that could be. If you've studied any of Roman military, you'd understand the cohorts, the 10 cohorts, the first line, 3 each. I mean, you start adding up, you can add up to about 6,000 men, depending on the time and the place and where you are. 6,000 men. Remember, the legion is Roman. Roman armies. This is how they conquered the world. Their legions. And he begs Jesus, "Do not send us out of the country. Do not send us away." That there's something so much deeper going on here. That I have to mention, and this has been new to me as I've learned this week too, that the 10th Roman Legion is was stationed in Judea from 6 BC, they controlled the region. They oppressed the people in so many ways. They stripped the people of their humanity. When you take a closer look and see what Jesus is doing, there's more than just healing a possessed man here. Because if the symbol of the Roman legion is a boar, which is a pig, but the world legion can also be described as battalion. Has about 2,000 members of it, according to history. And so when the unclean spirits beg him, send us into the pigs, I don't think this is happenstance. I think this is orchestrated and designed, because if any good Jewish reader or listener would know this story, it would give us an echo. It goes back to the Exodus. It goes back to the turmoil and the chasing and the Egyptian army with their weapons and chariots being swallowed by the sea too. But Jesus is declaring something powerful here. This is a revolutionary statement. This is a revolutionary undertone that's happening. And so Jesus gladly sends them into the swine. And that's another thing to show us that they are not in Jewish territory, because pigs are very unclean. According to the Levitical law, you can't eat pigs. A certain way their hooves are, and it's all back to the being clean and unclean and what you eat. Jesus, and then we'll see even with Peter down the road in Acts, this is all changed. But yet we know because of that this is definitely not a Jewish area. In the 7 to 10 possibility of different ethnic groups that live in Decapolis, at least one group, they were pig farmers. And here they are. And you would think that here's a Jew throwing these demons into pigs because he's a Jew, they're unclean. I don't think Jesus made that thought. I think Jesus is showing us, even in symbolism, that this is more than just about a demonic man. It's about a demonic world in which we all live. But this is more to this. That Jesus' identity, the identity of Jews, are all caught into the Exodus story, and Jesus places himself right there in the center of it. Pigs would jump into the sea, and they would be drowned. 2,000. Matthew's gospel says the abyss, which means back to the underworld, basically. Jesus is doing something here. And I meant to do a deep dive in why do they call cops pigs. Just saying. I don't know. I wish the story just ended there and everybody was happy, but it's not. But you see, the swineherds run off to the city and the country, and they tell people what had happened, and then they come back. They came to Jesus and saw the demonic sitting there, and I love this, clothed and in his right mind. The very man who had the legion, and they were afraid. Why were they afraid? Yeah, maybe somebody lost their business. That maybe we've got 2,000 dead pigs, that could be thousands of dollars of economy. Maybe the fact that they were thrown into the water and they will die in the water will jeopardize their water source for a while. That maybe that's a part of it, but it's really hard for me to look at that and not see how our human nature happens to be in this story too. And the fact that we're more concerned about our stuff than we are about someone who exists in this world that God values. Why did the crowds come? Did they want to see for themselves? Why do we come? Why do we come to this attraction and see this? And then what's so interesting is that they had seen what happened to the demonic and the swine and reported it, and then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. Wait a minute. Wouldn't this be the opposite of what we would do? That they're more invested in the drowning of the pigs than they are the drowning of the demons, and even this man that's been left to be dead and out of his mind for so many years. That's alarming to me to see this, but yet it is still in our own nature. We talk about people over programs, we talk about relationship over religion. We talk about value of people are so much more important than the stuff of this earth. I question constantly, why do we get uncomfortable when God's beginning to do something new? Maybe it goes back to that understanding that here we are, we're going, it's not the way we've always done it. Well, this doesn't feel right, or I just don't think that's what we should do, and we honestly, we live into that concept so often because it makes us think bigger and beyond our everyday and who we've always been and what we've always been taught to know. The symbol of the legion's condition, this man being ripped away in his nakedness and his self-wounding body, living alone, howling at night in the cemetery, and now he's in his right mind. And call that he's come home to oneself, to his self. We don't know the story of his family, we don't know how long it's been, we don't know how he got there. Seated clothed in his right mind. That the peace this man and the dignity this man had lost for so long has now been restored. But here, Jesus is saying something bigger to us. Saying that no matter what we're facing or where we feel we're trapped or stuck or a part of, there is relief. There is the opportunity to be freed from those demons. And then something happens in the Gospel of Mark that's never happened before in this Gospel. Because the man comes to him in his right mind, fully clothed, he's saying, hey, let me go with you. And Jesus refuses to let him go with him. But he says, go home, tell your friends how much the Lord has done for you. And the King James, if we're understanding right, he says, the King James uses the term great things. Tell them of great things the Lord has done. And you remember on the other side of the Sea of Galilee are the Jewish leaders. And he tells everybody, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody. Because he knew he had a limited amount of time and it would get tense. And then this is we'll see next week as we continue the story as he goes back to. But here he tells somebody for the first time, go tell everybody. Go home. Here's one of the first persons we see in the gospel sharing the message of Jesus. That here we see a life-giving situation play out. It changes the meaning of who Christ is for the world. It calls us to deeper understanding of where we are. Call the name. That no matter what our outward appearance or our behaviors or anything that we've experienced or how we've been labeled for so long, God says, I'm going to bring you out of that. You just got to trust me. And the people around you got to trust it too, because we're all in this together. I don't want us to miss that point at all. And truly, for our marinate, to ruminate, percolate. I want us to think about this. What in your life is life-giving? And maybe even think about what in your life is destructive or life-sucking. It pulls all the life out of you. Name it. How can we be get busy doing something. That not just demonstrates it, but at all cost lives into it, or Christ lives into it with us. So think about it. What in your life is life-giving? What in your life is toxic? How do you get rid of it? Can we also be people that are life-giving people? That when we enter into groups and families and situations that when people see us coming, they don't, oh, there we go, but they're excited because we're sharing the good news like this man did, the great things that God has done. Even in the midst of struggle, in the midst of pain, in the midst of chaos, God is still doing great things, and we're called to share that story. So marinate, ruminate, percolate, do something about it. Share the story of what Jesus is doing in your life, not what happened 25, 30 years ago. Maybe even the last 6 months, because that's the story that needs to be told. And we think maybe it hasn't happened. I think we need to sit longer, marinate, ruminate. Because it's there, because God is already at work, whether we realize it or not. May our eyes be made wide open, and our hearts be even bigger. Let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you for this story. And as problematic and confusing sometimes as it seems, and how the mental illness issues that are so real in this world. How we cry out to you in need for our brothers and sisters that are around us that are in need as well. How may we truly think this week, what is life-giving? May we curb those moments in which we've been life-draining. May we find the good news in the story that our lives have been a part of, the narrative in which we have. May we share that with one another. God, speak to us so we may speak to others. For all are valuable and of sacred worth. In the name of Jesus, our Lord and our Savior.